So, we have a very, very good friend of mine who I've known for many more years than I care to say. His name is Greg Serio, and Superintendent Serio, formerly from the New York State Insurance Department, before he was the commissioner there, he was general counsel. And I first met him in around 1997, 98, and I got a phone call from Greg when he was general counsel and said, "What do you mean you guys are raising the insurance limits? You guys didn't call me. This is never going to work." And despite our first initial problematic discussion, we did work through it and we became very good friends. He served in the Jackie administration and served in a variety of different roles, including before he got to the insurance department as chief counsel to the New York State Senate Standing Committee on Insurance. Greg knows everything and probably more than he cares to admit about insurance. The complicated issues that are plaguing our industry right now, his goal is to try to debunk that and break it down to its basic level. He's done a tremendous amount of work. When I first met him, he was working on reparations for the Holocaust, getting money back with former U.S. Senator Al D'Amato, who he is partners with, along with Robert McBride, my good friend, at Parkside Strategies. He worked with the senator to get the money back, and then he worked after 9/11, doing a tremendous amount of assistance to the victims, and also to get things back on track with the insurance crisis that followed. In fact, he was serving in a variety of capacities, including as the representative of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So he's been very involved in, I guess, the IATR sister organization for insurance. The IATR of Insurance Commissioners is what Greg's been very active in, and he served as the NIAC representative for the Financial Services and Banking Information Infrastructure Committee for the U.S. Treasury for George Bush, former President Bush, after 9/11. And he also served on the Government Affairs Task Force and the federal regulations arm of the organization. He's very active in these circles all over the world and nationally. He is the true insurance expert who I'm pleased to welcome as our keynote speaker for our 2014 conference on the issues of insurance, TNCs, and everything else you want to know on insurance. Thank you for coming, Greg. We really appreciate you being here, and your friendship is very much valued. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by apologizing for mixing food and insurance. They don't go well together oftentimes, but I think we'll do okay. I want to thank Matt and Robert for getting me involved with you today. When you're the superintendent of insurance for New York, you can't avoid the issue of taxis and liveries. Well, you can do a couple of things. First thing we did, just to give you a sense of my background on taxi and livery issues, the livery industry, and anybody who operates in New York, I may have seen Eddie there from time to time, and Robert, when there's an insurance crisis for the taxi industry would come down to Lower Manhattan and circle the insurance department building with their taxi cabs. So we thought, how do we get over on the taxi industry? We'll get a building with only 3 sides to it. So you couldn't circle us anymore. But that was one way of us addressing the issue of the protests that we used to deal with back in the old days. But the second one is actually a better story for me personally. And I was telling Robert the story the other night. I had a chance to go speak to some livery drivers up in the Bronx. 300 Dominican livery drivers. Wanted to have the superintendent come up to them and talk to them about their insurance issues that were going on back when I was superintendent. And my staff said, don't go up. They're trying to set you up. They want to blame you for all their problems. And I said, no, I'm going to go. My father was an immigrant from Italy, kind of had a sense of what the immigrant thing was all about. These are hard-working people, 18, 20 hours a day. I said, I'm going to go up to the Bronx, I'm going to meet with them. Well, the best thing that happened at that meeting, a great meeting, by the way, great meeting. They couldn't have been more appreciative of seeing their government officials going to see them. And all of you who are regulators in the audience, you know what that means. when your constituency sees you outside of your office. Well, anyway, I go to get my bagel, my bacon, egg, and cheese on a hard roll the next morning. And like every other morning, I do this in Lower Manhattan. And the guy who makes my bacon, egg, and cheese, he looks at me and goes, "You're that guy." And I had no idea what he was talking about. And when he picks up a copy of the Spanish language newspaper, El Diario, and my picture was on the front page of El Diario. And I became a celebrity, at least in my local delicatessen, if not in the taxi industry. So I've had some experience with taxi issues. Matt, when he was head of TLC, and I worked very well together on taxi issues. And so I've been in and around these issues during my life as a regulator. Now, in my current life as a partner and a consultant in park strategies out of New York, I still work on insurance issues. But this issue that we're going to talk about for a few minutes today is one that has managed to connect a lot of the dots of my career. And it involves, of course, this issue about insurance for these TNCs, for these transportation network companies. And I'm not here today to bash any company. I'm not bashing innovation. I'm not here to say innovation is bad. I'm not here to say that old style of things are the only way to do things. That's not what any of this is about. Yet you'll hear and have heard that anybody who questions some of the new rideshare programs, that's immediately what you get accused of doing. You get accused of saying you're anti-innovation, you're anti-competition. I'm not here to do that. I'm an insurance guy. I'm not a taxi guy. I'm not a livery guy. I'm an insurance guy. But one of the things that I've managed to find out and figure out and do on this issue is sort through the insurance issue as it relates to these rideshare programs. Now, when Matt asked me to do this program, there were about 5 other things on the calendar for today. And I wasn't quite sure if I can get down here to New Orleans and meet in front of you, and I'm happy I made that decision, by the way. But I'll tell you, I made my first decision, and I think I made my decision to come down after listening to a program last month at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners that had some insurance commissioners, that had some rideshare representatives, and that had one representative of the taxi, limousine, and livery industry on a panel. And after that panel, and I'll talk more about it in a minute, but after that panel, I decided I have to come and talk to you today. Because things that I heard from that panel and the folks from the rideshare industry and their insurance companies who are, and I'll use the first word that I'm sure will get me in trouble today, who are complicit with the rideshare companies, somebody has to correct the public record as it pertains to what they're saying about insurance and about how this whole thing works. Because things that I heard were just gross misrepresentations of how insurance really works. They were gross misrepresentations about what the personal lines industry, those people who do automobile insurance, what they're saying about this stuff, how it works in daily life, and as a former litigator, I know how insurance coverages work from the practical side as well as from the regulatory side. And I said, this is not right. This is not right at all, that they're just up there and they're saying things and nobody is questioning it. Nobody is questioning it. So that's the first reason why I decided to come here and speak to you today. The second inspiration, if you will, occurred just last night. Just last night. Robert, Eddie, and I, courtesy of Malachi, took a tour of New Orleans and managed to find food somewhere. But here's what we do. We're coming out of the Bourbon House, and we grabbed a quick cab ride. Nice kid behind the wheel, kid from upstate New York, down here at Xavier University. Smart kid, working his way, certainly industrious. He's talking about buying a car for this and a car for that. Great kid, great conversation. He tells us for the first 20 minutes why he doesn't think the rideshare companies are good. Then for the next 10 minutes, he tells us why he's going to join the rideshare companies. So, okay, which way is it? And then it's almost as if it was on cue. The three of us in unison said, what about the insurance? And this kid said, what about the insurance? I said, you haven't even thought about the insurance. And sure enough, this poor kid who's working hard, trying to make a living here in New Orleans, and going to Xavier, had never thought about his own exposure. And that's what a lot of this is about. Now we're starting to see headlines. Starting headlines about people aren't getting compensated the way they thought they were going to. People said, hey, they're taking more than I thought they were going to take out of my fare. Okay, now people are saying, maybe I'm not insured the way that I'm supposed to be. But I've got to be insured the way I'm supposed to be, but I can't afford that. And the system won't allow me to afford it, given with the business model of the rideshare companies. And that's where this thing starts to unravel. The problem is, as it was put out in a New York Times article just 2 weeks ago, and I want to read the first paragraph from that article because I think it's instructive, okay? It said, there is a pervasive attitude in a prominent corner of the technology industry that goes something like this. If you're helping people rent spare bedrooms or rides in their cars, then the usual regulation and niggling insurance issues should not apply. I'll repeat that. There is a pervasive attitude in a prominent corner of the technology industry that goes something like this. If you're helping people rent spare bedrooms, that's Airbnb, or rides in their cars, those are rideshare companies, then the usual regulations and niggling insurance issues should not apply. Here's the message. These are not niggling insurance issues. And I think the reporter got it just right when he wrote that very first sentence of his article, of his column. It was in the business section, September 5th, 2 weeks ago. Okay? Entrepreneurs start useful services, attract millions of users, cross their fingers, and hope nobody dies before the government minders and other scolds catch up. Wow. How many people did he indict in that first paragraph? Okay? The rideshare companies, their capital backers, and to some extent, us as the regulators. Because he said, we're late to the dance. We're not late to the dance of changing the rules to make these things work. We're late to the dance in enforcing the rules that are already there on a business that is insisting that the rules do not apply to them. And niggling insurance issues is a phrase that should stick in your head. Because insurance issues are not things that just get passed on the, get tossed on the side. They're not things that just get ignored. Insurance means either losing your house, losing your car, losing your business, or not losing your house, your car, and your business. The business model of the rideshare companies wants to ignore or rewrite the rules of insurance without anybody else rewriting them with them. Okay? They basically want to say, insurance doesn't matter. You can use your personal insurance. The answer to that is no, you cannot. Their livelihoods and their homes and their cars by insisting that they think that the personal lines carrier is going to cover them when they are either trolling for passengers, waiting in a cell phone parking lot at an airport, turning the app on and off. It doesn't work that way. Insurance does not work that way. They want you to believe that insurance works that way. They can kind of move it around fungibly. It can't. It can't. If you're engaged in a commercial activity, commercial insurance has to follow. That's how this works. That's how it works. Lloyd's of London was created 400 years ago, and that's how it works today. But they want to give their drivers a sense that, oh no, we'll buy you a policy. It doesn't work like that either. Okay? If I don't own the car, I don't own the business, you're not my employee, this is not what we call, this is a big issue in this market, it's not an insurable interest on the part of the TNCs. They are dispatchers. How many dispatchers do you know will say, I will take responsibility for that car out on the road? Zero, right? How many will say, I'll take responsibility for everything that occurs in that livery transaction? Nobody. That's what they're doing here. They're saying, oh yeah, we'll give you the insurance and you'll be covered. Well, the problem is they don't have an insurable interest if they're not employees, if they don't own the cars and they don't own the businesses. There's another black letter rule of insurance that they seem to just ignore. Last month at the insurance commissioners meeting, by the way, just to give you a sense of what people are up against, there were 4 different presentations by the rideshare companies to the various committees at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. 4, on 4 different panels. They have a phalanx of lawyers and consultants who are talking about this stuff and all saying the same thing, no matter how accurate or inaccurate it is. Okay? So they have a presentation. They did a big lunch program on rideshare and car share. Car share was kind of put off to the side. And they did a rideshare, mostly focused on rideshare. So being I like to think I'm a smart New Yorker that I am, I waited until the very last person was up to ask a question from the public. And then I got up and I stood behind her. The last question asked to the panel, and specifically to the representative of the insurance company writing these policies for the rideshare companies, and to the rideshare representative. By the way, the head of risk management and insurance for one of the major rideshare companies was on the panel, so I thought it would be a perfect audience. And I asked this question. I said, what is the insurable interest that the insurance company purports to be covering for the rideshare company? They don't own cars, they don't have employees, they have sworn up and down they are not in the transportation business, right? Everybody says it, we're not in the transportation business. What then are you covering? Whose liability are you actually covering? Are you covering their liability or are you just covering your own? Well, the answer to that question is they're just covering their own. They're not covering the liability of any other party. I've read the insurance policies 8 different ways. They used to write them on what they call an excess basis, where they backstop the insurance of the driver. Then they said, no, we'll be the driver's insurance instead, and we'll go primary. That's what they call it. Wait a second. You have no right to be the primary insurance coverage for that driver. You don't have any connection to that person other than the fact that they turned on the app on the phone. That's it. You don't pay taxes for them, you don't give them health insurance, you don't give them workers' compensation coverage, you don't pay the auto loan on their car, you have no other connection to that person at all. The guy from the insurance company gave me some half-assed response to my question. And then I asked the second question, and I said, okay, if you do have an insurable interest and you are protecting something that you're afraid you're going to be stuck with, does this mean that the rideshare companies pay judgments beyond the limits of the insurance coverage? I'll say that again. If you have an accident and you have a $5 million liability, okay? You hit that, or you had a bunch of nuns in the back seat of your car and they all died. Are you responsible for them? And are you responsible outside the limits of the policy? Silence. That's how my question was answered, with absolute silence. The answer, of course, is no. No, the rideshare companies are not going to say, okay, Mr. Driver, we're going to give you $1 million of coverage, but if the judgment is $2 million, we're going to pony up the remaining $1 million. It's not going to happen, okay? That's because the reason is because they don't have an insurable interest, which means, coming back to the first one, if you don't have an insurable interest, is that a valid insurance policy? I would propose to you today that I don't think the policies they have are valid. Not valid for the purposes of taking care of third-party liability of an unrelated person with whom you have no insurable interest. Okay? That's the way I'm looking at these things right now. Now these policies, this poor kid we talked to last night, maybe I'll go on their policy. No, it's not going to work that way. Why? Because they don't have that nexus. They want to make employees? Terrific. They want to own the cars? Fantastic. They want to take responsibility for what goes on in that car with the drivers that they don't vet? Wonderful. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying we're not in the transportation business. So how can it be that this insurance policy that they keep throwing around to people, how can it be that that insurance policy is real? It's on paper, you read it, but does it really work as an insurance policy? And I tell you, it does not. Now, one more thing. The industry has been trying to attack the insurance coverages in a lot of different ways. Okay, they went from excess to primary, whether they're with a non-admitted carrier or an admitted carrier. These are all insurance terms you don't need to really understand, except this is some of the discussion that's gone on. Here's the problem. Right now, regulators, insurance regulators, are under the mistaken impression that the problem regarding ride-share organizations is 2/3 completed, 2/3 solved. Now let me explain what I mean by that. At this meeting last month at the NAIC, the commissioner from California said, well, I think we've got it covered. Because they have this insurance policy, we have covered what happens when they have somebody in their car or when they have the app turned on. So all we need to do is figure out if there's insurance coverage when you're trolling for passengers, when you're waiting in that parking lot, before your app gets activated. And my response to that is, no, slow down. Nothing's been solved yet. Nothing has been solved. We're not 2/3 of the way done. We're not 1/3 of the way done. We have an underlying issue here, and that is, what do we do about the insurance question? Because this insurance that they have purported to cover everybody doesn't cover anything. As they say in the Italian communities, my father's from Sicily, they say they don't cover guts, okay? They don't cover anything, okay? All right, that's the bottom line. And the reality is that we need to take a step back and reevaluate how this insurance really is supposed to work. My answer to that is, it already works, and we know how it works. But because it bumps up against the convenience, or it's inconveniently bumped up against the business model that's been created, that's gotten all the hails and acclamations from all the Wall Street guys, well, those are the guys, last I checked, are making the rules in the state houses and the city councils around the country. The rules are this. You're in delivery business. Whether you're waiting for a passenger, responding to a passenger, or delivering that passenger, you're in delivery business. We have answers for this. This is not a matter of creating a whole new set of laws, but it is about enforcing the laws that we have. We have financial security rules in the cities and the states. Things that Matt and I used to work on all the time were exactly this type of issue. How do you address this issue? Well, you do it by going back to the rules that we already have. Look, the app is going to come and go. The app is the latest two-way radio, okay? The app is a telephone. The app is whatever you want to call it, the latest technological version of connecting a livery operator to a passenger. But these things change. They want to pretend that this is revolutionary. This is evolutionary. That's all it is. They want to talk about the app as if it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's not. It's just another step along the way. And we've already marked this way out by having rules that require the drivers and the owners of the cars to have insurance, and have insurance at the regulatory level. Why? It's a public safety issue. So whether you talk about the rates going up and down, depending on what they want to charge, whatever they want to charge them, or you talk about people not having the same kind of coverage, you have to go back to understand the public safety aspect of taxi regulation and insurance regulation, and that is to protect the riding public. I'll add one more dimension to that, is to protect the other drivers on the road. All of you who know anything about uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, okay, that protects you against the other guy who decided they didn't want to have insurance, or didn't want to have enough insurance, and drives crazy and gets into an accident and causes a lot of damage and a lot of injury. Okay, we already do that. We already buy uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage to protect ourselves against that irresponsible third party. But the rules are already there. But that's why we insist that the drivers and the owners and the operators have sufficient insurance. We're not here to have a debate about whether we should get the insurance from here or there. That's already been answered. It's a commercial lines coverage. It's written by them. It is expensive. Nobody's going to deny that taxi insurance is not expensive. But you can't build a business model on the idea that you just ignore that component and expect the business model to be successful, unless they insist that you ignore that component. And we cannot ignore that component. We cannot ignore the reality that there has to be financial security behind each and every driver. So somebody who goes out and says, I'm going to take mom's car out for a while and see who I can pick up. It can't work that way. For the integrity of this industry, for the safety of our public, it cannot work this way. And it shouldn't work this way. Now, here's the problem. Talking to a former insurance superintendent, a good friend of mine, who says, yeah, my son's doing this. He used the Uber app, and he goes on every once in a while, and he'll pick somebody up, he'll do it. And this guy, an insurance professional, an insurance regulator, said to me, I don't see a problem with that. And I don't see why his personal insurance shouldn't cover it. And I'm like, what? You've been a regulator for 15 years, you've been in insurance for 40 years, and you say you don't see a problem with that. That is your challenge. That is my challenge. That is the challenge of everybody who's trying to bring some sobriety back into this conversation. So that we don't have this perversion of the insurance laws. We have to go against the mass appeal, not just of and to the drivers, but to the drivers' fathers and mothers, who don't seem to think that there's a problem with this. That is our challenge. There's something wrong. There's something wrong. Well, he just does it for a cup of puppy. He does it for gas money. And when he said that to me, and he said it to another former regulator too, and Tom was equally astonished. You know, it reminded me of those things that you'd hang up at college. Okay? Going to Long Island from Albany, tear off the number, I'm going down this weekend. That is rideshare, okay? They're not in the business of providing deliveries, okay? You just wanted a cheap ride home. But when this becomes commercialized, when it becomes established, when it becomes institutionalized, things change. The rideshare organizations are not that poster up on the academic podium of SUNY Albany asking people if they want to ride home. Okay? We're way past that. You love to talk about a rideshare as being that. Hey, it's very informal, it's very convenient. This is a business enterprise, and all of you know that. They know it. If it wasn't a commercial enterprise, it wouldn't be valued at $17 billion. Okay? But this is very much a commercial enterprise, and the insurance industry, by the way, and part of responding to the challenge they put out to you, the insurance industry needs a fair dose of intestinal fortitude to speak the right way on this issue. The personal line guys are all getting wobbly, they're all getting weak-kneed. I don't want to say that we're not in favor of this. I don't want to say that we won't do this somewhere down the road. I don't want to say that your homeowner's policy or your auto policy won't cover you. All right? They're getting weak-kneed, and that's really dangerous. Okay? The insurance industry has got to stand up straight, knees locked, and say no. But here's why they won't do it. Because the same groups that represent these personal lines carriers also represent the guys who are writing this insurance coverage. Okay? So you have to go back, the regulators, you have to go back to your partners in the insurance regulatory world, and you got to say the insurance companies, the guys that you represent, the guys that you regulate, have got to stand up and say yes and no. There are not a lot of shades of gray here. Okay? Not in this issue. I've looked for them. I can't find them. This is a black and white issue in a lot of respects, and it goes to whether there's an insurable interest, whether it's a commercial activity, what is the right insurance that should be covered, or should be used in this case. Very simple, well-established stuff, going back 400 years or more. There's no need for us to pretend that there is a solution in search of a problem. Okay? There is not a problem. There's a problem of having the intestinal fortitude to say, slow down. You need to rethink your business model. As great as it might be, you got to rethink the business model because it doesn't comport with the way that the rules are established now and that a great many other people are following. Okay? So that's the challenge in front of all of us. How do we get the parents of the world to understand that their kids are involved in a commercial activity before they lose their house? How do we get the regulators, the guys, my former colleagues, to go talk to the insurance carriers, and how do we get the insurance carriers to stand a little bit more firmly and say, you're right, we have to talk more decisively and less ambivalently about whether this really is commercial activity or not. But that's the reality of insurance in this case. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody about it anywhere, anytime, because I have been unconvinced especially after watching many of these panels and debates go on, I'm unconvinced that this insurance that they have put out there is really protecting anybody. So with that, hopefully we didn't lose any appetites along the way. I got a question now. I'll take a couple questions. First one in the back. Ma'am. You need to start over here. And after that, I need to roll.
In a previous life in Canada, from Canada, I was a chartered insurance professional. And I'm just wondering, in the U.S., when it comes to traditional carpooling, I'm already going from point A to B, and my neighbor is going to the same place, whether even that needs to be disclosed to your insurance company. Because in Canada, I believe it's been a while, but there's a standard endorsement form, even for traditional carpooling, let alone the type that is for hire. What I'm saying is, even traditional carpooling is something you must disclose to your insurance company in Canada. Otherwise, you risk being denied a claim.
Great question. And it is great that what she's getting at is the tough issue. Now, for those of you who know the insurance world, it's basically broken up into two parts, right? Underwriting and claims. Now, underwriting takes place on its own, and you decide if you're going to get your policy written or not, and they'll decide if they're going to cover you or not, right? That's underwriting. Now, here's what happens on the claim side. On the claim side, they don't just decide whether they should cover the claim when you've had an accident. They go back and rethink whether they should have covered you from the first place. So what you have to do is you have to be scrupulously honest on the front end of it. When I was in the insurance department, we dealt with this issue every day. Are people lying on their application? Are people misclassifying what they do? Okay, we used to deal with the Medicars versus the liveries, street hails versus the black cars, and all that stuff, to get that. Now the question is, if you're carpooling or doing other things, a lot of insurance applications will require you to disclose that if you're doing it on a regular basis. Not even so much from a commercial standpoint, but just from the standpoint of what's the company's exposure. If I know you're going to have 5 people in your car every day, your rate's going to change. I'll still write you, but your rate's going to change potentially. Okay? But if you're doing it for $1 of commercial benefit, and exchanging gas is not a commercial benefit, okay? But like, I'll tell you the example of the horse, okay? The horse, because we were getting $100 off our boarding fees, okay? Because the horse we used in the training program. Guess what that is? That's not bartering, that's a commercial activity. And when my wife came home and told me about this, I'm like, first, are you out of your mind? Second one was, we had to buy insurance. Because it's a commercial activity. You think, a lot of people think, what's the harm? Hey, I'm getting $100 off my boarding fee, and the horse is going to be used a couple of days a week. Well, when you're an insurance guy, that takes on a totally different view than if you just charge you public. And when you're an insurance guy, all sorts of red flags go up, and the same red flags go off with carpooling, or when you're starting to do something for a commercial purpose. Question? Okay. Sir.
I'm Michelle from New York. Would you speak to the commercial interest, just from a simple-minded standpoint, not an insurance guy standpoint? It would seem like if I call and arrange a ride with one of the app providers, that is their, they said that they are and they aren't in the transportation business, setting aside that, as a matter of what you would find is happening in court. They're arranging that ride, and the ride wouldn't happen if they were involved in it. And so from kind of just a common sense standpoint, it would seem like they then have insurable interest. I'm going to sue them if something happens because of their role in that. And all that may be sorted out in a complicated way. But just in terms of having, like, being a stakeholder with that vehicle and that driver, with something that off with that, could you just speak to that?
Great question. Okay. Insurable interest does not mean that you're liable. Insurable interest does not mean that you're not a stakeholder. You can be a stakeholder, but not have an insurable interest. You can be liable and not have an insurable interest. But the insurable interest is the thing that underpins every insurance policy, means that you have some direct economic connection to that which is being insured. It's to protect against people gambling.
Right, but you're taking a percentage of the fare.
Okay, well, I'm taking a percentage of the fare, but here's the thing. Number one, am I relying upon that driver to make me X amount of dollars? And if that's the case, I'm not writing automobile liability insurance. That's not really what my exposure is. My exposure is financial. My exposure is I should have a financial guarantee product that tells me that if John Jones does not deliver me X amount of dollars, then I need some coverage for it. It's a different type of coverage, it's a different type of exposure on the part of the TNCs, okay? It's not auto liability. You're not suing the TNC because they weren't behind the wheel of that car. You're not suing the TNCs because they were the owner of that vehicle. That's who's responsible. So the question is, why do they have the insurance on a car they don't own, on a person they don't employ, on a car they do not operate? That's the insurable interest issue. And they'll be the first ones to argue, by the way, that if there's an accident, we weren't responsible. They'll go back to the contract, they'll find a reason why the person violated the contract, and they'll say we're off the hook.
To your knowledge, have any of these insurance policies actually paid?
I don't know if the insurance policies have paid anything yet. The cases are starting to come up, but that was one of the questions, and that would have been the perfect answer from the guy from the insurance company when I asked the question about the insurable interest. He should have said, we have an insurable interest, and we have paid on the insurable interest. To this day, I don't believe, because the policies keep changing, by the way, I don't believe that anything's been paid out on them yet, and they have not acknowledged that if they have. Okay? Other questions?
We know that personals aren't covered by anybody under these circumstances. What about if you violated the liquor clause, you drive your family someplace? You have violated that liquor clause, are you still covered when you're driving your family?
Generally speaking, in a commercial policy, that will cover incidental personal use of that vehicle. Okay? Personal does not cover incidental commercial activity, generally speaking. Okay, so if you're driving your family, the answer is yes. If you're driving your family, if you're driving a stranger who's paying you money for it, you will not be covered by the personal policy. Okay? Other questions? Right here, Colonel.
You said that the cases you know of, the insurance companies have not had to pay. What was the determination of the court?
I don't think those cases have matured yet to that point. We're in the middle of those kind of cases right now.
Nobody has started.
I've not heard of a settlement that has occurred. I certainly don't know that there's been a case which has been sued and settled for more than the policy limits. That's the test I want to see. I want to see that $5 million case. I don't want to find out who is responsible for paying those amounts over the limit. Now, here's what happens in New York and some other states. I know not in all states. Here's what happens. You take your car out, you take your mother's car, and you go do a little ride sharing, okay? And you get into an accident. Guess what happens? Every insurance coverage in that house gets what they call stacked on top of one another, okay? So now suddenly you're running a commercial enterprise out of your home with that car, and every other car is now exposed. And now it's up to the personal lines guys to unravel this. Because if you have $1 million policy on that car, and you have 3 more cars, each with $1 million policy, guess what the trial lawyer is going after? $4 million, okay? This is part of the complication. There was a consumer advocate on the panel at the NAIC meeting who did a wonderful job. Sonia Larkin, who is from the insurance industry, by the way, and retired out of the industry, she is concerned that the personal lines, that all of us who buy auto insurance for our personal cars are going to subsidize these commercial policies or these commercial activities. Because what happens when you start to get these claims? They go back into the rate base. Okay? And here's the other headline. The answer from the rideshare company was, well, if the personal lines guys just expedite how they adjust the claims, then we can find out if we're exposed or not. Well, that costs money. In fact, the rate that you pay, only part of it relates to actual payouts. The defense of cases, in some cases, is the majority of the money paid out by an insurance company, and that goes right back into your rate base. So what happens is, it doesn't matter. What they forgot to do is think about all the mechanics of insurance in between. And I was surprised at how overly simple they were approaching this issue, because it's far more complicated. I used to do insurance defense work. I used to do insurance plaintiffs work. I know how these policies all get stuck together. When you're using a car, paying for the trial lawyer, he's not thinking, how do I get the personalized guy out of the picture? I'm thinking, how do I keep every bit of insurance and then some in the picture? So everybody's now involved. The rideshare policy, the personalized policy, the homeowner's policy, and any other insurance that I can get my hands on, guess what? I'm putting it all into the same pot. And you know what? That's what they're supposed to do. That's what trial lawyers do. And that's what their oath is to do, is to get the most money for their client. So it's not this great, I couldn't believe the scenario they set up. Oh yeah, the personalized guys will say, they don't cover this, and we'll just take it. Pie in the sky stuff. This stuff gets really complicated. I had an accident 2 years ago, not my fault, with two other parties. Car gets hit by a truck across the road. That car spins 3 lanes of traffic, hits my car. You know I can't get that case settled? Why? Because the owner or the insurer for the car that actually hit me is said, no, we think it's the truck's fault, so we're not going to pay you. How the hell does that work? But the reality is this, that's how it works. Okay, but that insurance company is not making any statement of liability, any claim of having been responsible for the accident. All of you who have been in accidents, or your vehicles have been in accidents, you know how this works. Okay, it is a morass. Okay, that is what this is, and it's complicated. And these guys are simply saying, oh yeah, the carrier will just say, no, it's not ours here. There's some lawyer out there who's saying, not so fast. And I think that people have to be very much aware of that. Okay, one more question? Is that good? One more? 2 more? What kind of time do we have? Anybody else? Okay, one more question. Anyone?
Why are insurance commissioners so afraid to even talk about it?
Good question. I'll try and give you a good answer. Quick insight into insurance commissioners. If you come from California, your insurance commissioner is elected. If you come from New York, your insurance superintendent is appointed by the governor. If you're from right here in Louisiana, your insurance commissioner is elected. Right? Jim Donovan's been elected how many times? Okay? The reality is that they come at it from 5 different directions. Some states don't have anything to do with Uber or Lyft or the rideshare services. Other states, California, New York, teeming with them. But not a big issue when they follow the rules in New York as licensed liveries. Okay? But in California, they're home. They want to really, they're putting a full court press on it. So it depends upon the pressure that the commissioners are getting, number one. Are the elector appointed? Are their bosses getting pressure, i.e. the governors? Are the legislators pressuring them? Do they not want to be on the wrong side? If you come out as anti-Uber and you're running for election, guess what happens? Not only do you get Uber money against you, okay, but you also get the public saying, my guy's in the dark ages. I've been told my guy's thinking the old ways. He's trying to maintain the status quo. He's not the guy I want to have representing me. That's why. You got to go into the psychology of the elected officials, of the appointed officials who work for elected officials. There is, Alan Greenspan said this back right before the recession. He used that term, irrational exuberance. Well, that's what situation we have right now. This is irrational exuberance over something that has been driven by convenience, a lot of people say it, by $17 billion in capitalization and market value. This is irrational exuberance that has forgotten all this other stuff that, as a regulator, I got paid to worry about. And as members of the transportation community, whether you're regulators or operators, that's what we get paid to worry about. And that's what we have to keep pressing this issue. No matter how much money, how much influence, how much convenience this may provide, we have to make sure that they understand the actual story, and that's why we do things like we're doing today. All right, last question.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the need for coverage for TNC drivers when they're not signed to the app? Like, for example, they're driving around looking for an illegal street hail, busy looking down at their app. It doesn't have to be on, but it's sitting right there, cruising along with legitimate meter caps. Oh, and we'll say run someone over in an intersection. What is the need for insurance for that activity? Again, not signed into the app.
My opinion is that it's a commercial activity no matter what. We talked about that 1/3, 2/3 thing where they were responding to an hail or they had picked somebody up. But before that,
Actually, they're engaged in what the company says and the drivers claim they don't do, but we all know they do it, which is in fact looking for soliciting.
well, that's what my reference was earlier. Like, I dealt with all this stuff when I was superintendent. You know, we dealt with the guys who classified themselves in metacars, okay, the lowest rate. But they were out doing street hails, okay? The gray cars versus the black cars. I lived through all that stuff. And the problem is this, I'm not trying to be a stickler. I don't want somebody not to be able to make a buck. But the problem is, everybody knows, from an actuarial standpoint, street hails are more dangerous than metacar activity, okay? People know street hails are more dangerous than black cars or dispatch vehicles, okay? We just know those are realities. People want to simply ignore realities that we know. And they want to say, why can't they? And I understand the psychology of saying, why can't they? Well, they can until somebody gets hurt. Now, in New York, you guys may have seen this in the papers. Poor woman got hit by a bike. She just died. Okay, she got hit by a bike. Why? Because nobody thought it was really a problem with people riding around Central Park like lunatics. Okay? Why? Because nobody ever died. Nobody ever died getting hit by a bike in Central Park. Well, guess what? Now we have somebody who's dead. Do we want this? Use that as the analogy for this situation. Do we wait for somebody to die? Do we wait for somebody to lose their business before we clarify some of these issues? And the answer has to be no. So my opinion is this is a commercial activity from beginning to end and should have commercial insurance coverage for it. Thank you very much.